In the world of clinical trial design, there are millions, even billions of dollars on the line. Each pharmaceutical trial is a high-stakes bet against a bunch of complex variables. Clinical trials are the lifeblood of medical advancement, and a well-orchestrated one is the bridge between scientific discovery and life-saving therapies reaching the hands of those that need it most. How do we tilt the odds in our favour to use technology as a crystal ball to predict clinical outcomes more accurately? And how do we navigate a sea of historical data that's murky at best to get the best quality insights? On the show today, Nathan Moore from Talking Health Tech speaks to CEO Saurabh Jain and Company Director Damon Rasheed from TrialKey. And in this episode, we talk about the groundbreaking role of predictive algorithms in clinical trial design, the surprising reality that existing trials may already hold the key to future success, and how transparent data analysis is reshaping what's possible in pharmaceutical progress. Collaboration starts with a conversation, Team Health Tech. Let's make it happen.
Welcome to Talking Health Tech, featuring content and community about technology and healthcare. We acknowledge the traditional owners of lands these conversations were recorded and pay respect to elders past and present.
Good morning, everyone, or whatever time it actually might be today. But thanks for all being here today. Today, we're bringing you TrialKey with Saurabh and Damon. First of all, guys, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction? So, Saurabh, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Nathan, obviously, nice to meet you. So I'm Saurabh. I'm a software engineer by trade. My last major CEO gig was in a $100 million business that I exited about two and a bit years ago. So since then, what I do is kind of do like this interim CEO gig for about 6 months a year, and that's where I've been at TrialKey for the last 4 months. I'm on a couple of company boards, and I spend a lot of time with the wife and the kids, and we travel a lot. But yeah, the focus of my life these days is very much on TrialKey, trying to get the tool that Damon and the guys have built up for the last 3 years out to market.
And I'm Damon. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Damon. So I run a data science and machine learning consultancy business in Australia. Probably about 10 years ago, we started and we were building sports betting models of all things. And over the years, we've developed some really like cutting edge ways to analyze data. And then for the last 3 years, we've applied all of our knowledge to predicting the outcome of clinical trials. Same sort of technology as sports betting, but a totally different field, and maybe a better for the world use case than sports betting.
I'll let you guys say that. I wasn't going to comment or judge, but I think I agree. No, fantastic. So I guess for those uninitiated, I mean, would you like to talk to us a little bit about, provide some insights into the significance of clinical trials in the pharmaceuticals industry, and particularly why effective trial design is crucial for success for these trials?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'll give you even probably a bit more context around what we've kind of done over the last 3 years. So the theory is that everything we need to know about the human body and how we interact with drugs and devices is somewhat already known. Like, we've actually done like 400,000 trials over the last 20 or 30 years. And what's happened now is the knowledge is like so dispersed in so many different sources. It's like way too big for one person to know themselves.
Yeah.
And that's why you see specialization and subspecialization. And then, one person will spend 30 years of their life on like a single molecule that they're trying to figure out. So all the guys have done is taken those 65,000 trials now, about to be up to 400,000 trials, gotten about 700 variables of each trial, and figured out what leads to success in a clinical trial. And that's an insanely complex problem to solve because it varies by phase and by condition and by the drugs and by the mechanisms. But over the last 3 years, the guys have built a predictive model around that. And they get it right about 90% of the time. So it sounds super crazy, super non-credible, but now you can actually predict the outcome of a clinical trial with 90% accuracy before you start the trial.
Wow. I mean, I might jump to you now with this one, Damon, but I mean, you've, as Saurabh just said, a lot of what trials are about is identifying unknown questions. We know there's so much we don't know about people. And often when we're talking about training models, and I'm by no means the expert in this space, but we train them on known outcomes. You've mentioned you're taking all these existing trials, previously done things, but now we're trying to use AI to predict the outcomes of things that haven't yet been done. Could you tell us a little bit how that actually works?
That's a great question. So So here's one analogy. Like my data science company, we were asked to predict for a road authority here in Victoria what the chance of having an accident, a major injury or a fatality on each of their road segments. And some of those road segments may never have had a major injury or fatality, but there is some probability, associated to that happening. So it turns out that machine learning is actually quite good at predicting into areas of, low frequency, because there's enough common elements about, say, a road section. It might be the speed limit, it might be the number of lanes, all sorts of things. It's the same with clinical trials. In clinical trials, there is, as Saurabh mentioned, there's so many clinical trials that have been done, and a lot around novel conditions. You can borrow enough from sort of the global factors that influence clinical trials, so that you can apply them to a situation where a drug's never been tested before. So there are certain factors that are equally applicable across all trials, and that's and what we find is that like a bunch of trials are just designed badly. It doesn't matter if it's a novel condition or whether it's a condition that's been well studied. They're just poorly designed, and we've got enough data to see that.
Okay, right. So, sorry, go, Sarah.
Well, I guess the analogy I'll give to you, Nathan, is, for example, if you're trying to figure out what makes a great podcast, you'd probably
Talking
think,
health tech makes a podcast.
Yeah, totally. Like, that's what you need. You just need the title. You need a guy called Nathan with some amazing headphones. But you might say, is it the host? Is it the chemistry? Is it the way it's marketed? The way the post-production is done? So there's all these variables that exist. So even when you do a new podcast, that set of variables still exist. And you have done 1,000 podcasts in the past, and we know all about you. We know how you interact. So you can actually use that historical context to predict an unknown future outcome, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. It does. And I guess that from what you were saying, Damon, I mean, the context of what you are doing here with this sounds an amazing company. You're guiding the pharmaceuticals company, you're helping them to better prepare. You're not. Are you saying you're replacing the trials here, or you are helping them design them? Like, what is it you're actually doing for these companies or research institutes?
Yeah, so the use case here is that if a company's about to engage in a clinical trial, we can help them design a better protocol that's likely to significantly increase their probability of success. Now, I've seen in the data where low-hanging fruit can change, the chance of a trial succeeding from, say, 35% to 50%, which in the context of the amount of money spent on clinical trials is about $15 million spent on, say, an average phase 2 clinical trial, and also the payoff if you get it right. Increasing success rates by 15, 20% is massive, right? And often you're tackling low-hanging fruit, and sometimes it's not even going to increase the cost of running the trial. We've found examples where, say, patients, like there's over-recruitment of patients that aren't, an additional patient isn't likely to significantly increase the chance of success. They could actually recruit 200 patients less and save $5 or $10 million on the trial and not affect their success rate. So it doesn't necessarily translate to using our tool means that you're spending more on your trial. We just optimize all the variables to maximize success rates. And sometimes you will have to spend some more. Sometimes you'll save some money.
Yeah, no, really interesting. And I love that idea of helping to predict what the interactions of the different elements could be and how you can adjust them for optimization. It's fantastic. So, I mean, to jump into the nitty gritty a little bit here, like how does your software actually leverage predictive algorithms, machine learning to do it? Like what's a bit of the nuts and bolts? How does it work?
Yeah, so maybe I can tackle that one. So as Saurabh mentioned, we've got about 700 variables that we've extracted from each clinical trial, and we've got about 65,000 clinical trials that we've done this for. Now, the data sources themselves are public, things like places like clinicaltrials.gov. You have a bunch of registered trials there, nearly 400,000. But what we've done is we've used a combination of the structured data within clinicaltrials.gov. That's structured data means that the data is given to you. Like how many patients are they looking to recruit? 350. That's structured data. But then we've used advances in natural language processing to extract unstructured data. So this is like your free text where we can learn a lot more about each trial. Things like the drug mechanism, dosages, dose frequencies, inclusion-exclusion criteria, primary, secondary endpoints. All of these really important facets of clinical trials have been, no one's been able to put them into a data set because we needed advancement in natural language processing models. So now we have GPT-4. We can extract that sort of information for the very first time as humanity, and find out the impact of those features on success rates. So once you've got your data set, your training set, the target, of course, is will a clinical trial meet one of its goals, its primary endpoints? That's how we're grading success. And then once you've got your data set, you can apply, the modern sophisticated machine learning techniques to that data set. Our main point of difference is that we don't just estimate the probability of success. We use a branch of emerging AI called explainable AI to understand the impact of each of those variables on the success rate. And that's how we can design trials, right? We know we have a chart, say, for example, of patient enrollment, and this will vary by phase and condition, but we can pick an optimal point for enrollment for a particular phase and condition based on this explainable AI. So it's used, and that's a big change from the way it's historically been done. It's usually done by biostatisticians using things like power tests, and where they make a number of assumptions. We're actually using real world data, as Saurabh mentioned before. All this information is contained in the 400,000 trials that humanity has done, and we're leveraging that.
Absolutely fascinating. And this idea of actually having them, that visibility and referenceability of the individual components, that's really, really fascinating stuff. I mean, I don't want to get too much into the nuts and bolts, but I mean, I'm just picturing using NLP to scrape all of the free text stuff. I mean, building your data set, was there a lot of cleaning required or like that? I can just picture that. It's
about 3 years worth of cleaning. Another major problem with the data source is that there's a massive, these trials get registered, and whether they pass or fail is often it's not reported on. So there's supposed to be a reporting system by pharmaceutical companies and other, like hospitals, universities, on what actually happened to the trial. But it turns out that only in about 16% of cases there actually is an answer. Right. And that makes it very difficult to build an algorithm if we don't know whether something succeeded or passed. So a lot of our cleansing has been actually using natural language processing and other techniques to try to figure out whether a trial met its endpoint or not. So, and that's using, third-party data sources like press releases and also linking trials between phases. There's a lot of techniques we've used, but that was a massive challenge at the outset. And that makes our data set unique here as well, because we've curated this publicly available source and filled in as many gaps as we could.
Yeah, no, amazing work. It's one of the unfortunate things we see sometimes in research and academia is people don't like shouting their failures from the rooftops quite as much either. So I can imagine it would be quite a mixed bag of what you could see.
Well, not only that, initially we thought if they didn't report, it must have failed. But so they don't shout their successes either.
Oh, okay, right. All right.
It runs both ways. So there was, it turns out that because there's no policing of whether trials are updated or not with the results. They just don't get done.
Right. Okay. Well, there's a whole other podcast in that one. Maybe we need to get someone on and work out how we can support and enforce that piece. I mean, look, it's again, you've blown me away already, and I'm sure likewise with our listeners. But what we'd love to hear is how this is impacting, real world examples. Like, do you guys have some examples of how your programs, your projects have supported real world success stories for improving trial outcomes or planning for drug advancement?
Very little, unfortunately. I mean, we only launched the product about a month or two ago.
Okay.
So we're still in the very, very early stages. What we find, like when we pitch to people, it's often just disbelief. This doesn't even sound real. Because it actually doesn't sound real. But the guys that were in like the early stages with like a lot of the stuff that we pick up is stuff they kind of unconsciously know. Look, we haven't got enough patients, or we've over-recruited, or we've picked the wrong site, we've got the wrong CRO managing this. But what we kind of give them is all that data to kind of really support that gut feeling.
Yep.
The other part that we found for the initial customers we're working with is Like, we do a lot around competitor analysis. Like, what are the other trials that are trying to solve the same problem either the same way or a different way? When do they start? When do we think they're going to finish? And what's the probability of success? So it's helped some of the early customers kind of figure out, what are the right horses to really back in that space.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, it obviously has that competitive edge, like you mentioned, but also, I mean, could help reduce that duplication of resource and research investment too, which can be such a challenge, people reinforcing the same things over and over, having these parallel studies running that maybe, that duplication piece could avoid some of the research waste as well. Yeah, really.
No, very much so. And the other part that I didn't think was going to be a use case, I didn't see it, was on the duplication is some companies are thinking they actually won't run trials in the real world. So you kind of touched on before, like, I don't think we'll ever replace real world trials, but there are like 35,000 trials in the world every year. I think what will happen is that number will shrink and there'll be millions of trials in like a trial simulator like ours. And they'll use that to figure out the best candidates to go test in humans. And they'll probably overfund them and over-resource them, do them really, really well because they think that's what's most likely going to succeed rather than trying 100 different things.
Yeah, so more precision in targeting where these trials will be run for specific purposes.
Yeah. And then more precision in a lot of the nuancy things. So in our next model we're working on now is we're going to rate sites and CROs because some sites are better at different phases and different conditions. So really picking out the best place to do them, the best countries. Because obviously we've got genetic diversity across the world. And some countries, for some conditions, you actually really want to make sure you test there. Because, in Asians, they just are different in some ways to Eastern European, different to Europeans, different to Americans, and different issues, heart disease is just more prevalent in America. Obesity just happens to be more prevalent in America. So if you're doing a drug trial on an obesity drug and you don't do America, we actually take percentage points off. And they're all like nuancy things that you kind of actually, that kind of makes sense, but it's actually hidden in the data and that's actually a thing.
Yeah, I mean, on this idea of, so you mentioned your point system and the locations, like how do you drive those decisions? How do you determine, that not being in America warrants a point reduction and thing? Like what's that informed by?
So that's the explainable AI component. Right. And, without getting too much into the technicals, it does provide the marginal impact of each variable. So you can say, okay, if you're not in America, that might take 2.5% off your chance of success. Whereas if you're in America, it might be adding 4.5. So there's a net swing there, of around 6%. So for every minute variable, for every variable, including, what countries you're in, you can quantify how that will impact your trial. And then it will come down to a cost benefit analysis, right? Because at least we're providing the transparency to say, if you did this, this is the impact. And then it depends on resources and, timeframes and priorities and things like that. But we're providing the transparency to make those decisions.
Yes, sir. And actually, Saurabh, you just mentioned like working on new models and so. So what are some of the ongoing development efforts? I mean, you've just launched, so it's we're already thinking of what the next steps are. But, what are the ongoing efforts aimed at furthering building your software's capabilities, and how do you see it changing into the future for what the future looks like?
So there's probably two main categories. One category is more around precision. One's probably a bit more around completeness. Like if you talk to us back in December, today we're about 90% accurate. A couple months ago, we were 88% accurate. A year ago, we were like in the low 80s. So it's to kind of just climb, just to get as high as you possibly can on the accuracy model. And the way you do that is you increase the number of variables. 3 months ago, we had about 500. Now we've got about 700. We think we'll be at about 1,000 in the next model we're working on now, which is probably about a month away. So in this case now, we're including things like compounds and molecules. And it will actually be super interesting to see the compounds and molecules make a meaningful difference to clinical trial success. I think they will, but we'll find out for sure pretty soon. So that's on the precision side. Then it's probably more on the completeness side. So like we do 65,000 trials. We're only right now drug randomized control. So we're adding devices, alternative therapies, and just all the other kind of drug trials out there. And that's why it will go from 65,000 to about 400,000 trials. So then we can kind of help people in different kind of segments.
Just on that accuracy metric, I mean, because I realized I didn't actually unpack that earlier. What do you mean when you're talking about the accuracy? Because I mean, if it's not being used in the trials yet, like what is that accuracy you're referring to?
Maybe I can tackle that. So what we did is we constructed a training set. So out of the 65,000 trials that we analysed, we built a model on data from the year 2000 to 2018. And then we had what's called a holdout sample of all the trials that were registered from 2018 onwards, where we know what the outcome was. And then we use our model that's been trained on a data set that of a certain period and predict into that unknown data set, so that the test set hasn't been trained at all. So it's completely new data to the model. And then you got to find out, how do you go? And that's where those accuracy measures come from. So if, for those that are statistically minded, we have an AUC, well over 0.9. And then if you're looking at things like precision recall, it's incredibly accurate. So you've got the algorithm is incredibly good at categorizing the successes. And that's, where that over 90% accuracy comes from. We've got lots of information on our site about how we've validated this, because it's an important question, right?
Yeah.
It's like you want to know, how is this validated? So it's usually using traditional methods that are well established in AUC, precision recall, etc.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. So I guess like we're getting close to wrapping up now. One of the things I like to finish up towards is what do you see changing in the space? These things are evolving very rapidly at the moment. It feels like the technology and technological advancement is just rocketing away. So how do you see the field of clinical trials evolving in response to the technologies and regulatory landscapes, predictive software, and the evolution? Like, what do you see coming?
Can I have first crack?
Go for it.
So there's an interesting use case here, because we've talked about pharmaceutical companies and other drug designers using our software, but there's a whole other community that might actually drive the future of clinical trials, and that's the investment community. Because we can predict the outcome of clinical trials, the investment community is particularly interested in, the obvious example is publicly listed companies, right? So I think the investment community are fast adopters to this sort of technology, because they think they might be able to get an edge. And my feeling is that once this starts to become established, they're going to direct funding to the pharmaceutical companies. You're not going to get funded unless you've used a product like TrialKey to validate your trial, because at the moment there's information asymmetry between the investors and the people designing the trial, right? They're just taking their word for it. We provide an independent sort of validation. So I think there might be just a bit of a change in the way the dynamics works, and there might be more power put across to the investment side. That's just my feeling. It could be totally wrong, but that's how I see it playing out.
Anyone who'd think maybe you had a background in sports betting analysis or something,
Well, Saurabh and I have made one investment and we're 1 for 1. So maybe we'll quit now. We invested in a stock called Dimerix, which our model picked, and they announced some positive results. So we're 1 for 1. We might just quit at 100% success rate.
Sorry, what's on the horizons for you, mate? What do you see coming?
Look, I love a good analogy. So the analogy I'll give is like genetically modified food. What we kind of did, right, is we figured out what happens in nature, how plants evolve and how you can kind of breed plants together. And we just sped it up. Still not sure if it's safe or not. I hope it is.
Yeah.
So you just sped up the evolution of something that happened anyway, and you made it very, very fast, and you made it so it happened in a couple of generations, not in 100 generations. I think the same is going to happen for clinical trials, or we're just going to ramp up the evolution of clinical trials. As Damon kind of said, is you'll get hopefully almost like a perfect allocation of capital, where money, resources, time will go to the conditions and to the issues that we think we can solve, like as a population, and it'll become like a really strong meritocracy. So you'll kind of unveil like, the fog of war when it comes to clinical trials, about not knowing, are we doing the right thing? Are we not doing the right thing? Is this going to succeed? Is this not going to succeed? You'll kind of know before you start. And it just means the best ones will survive and the worst ones will kind of get culled out, which is like a good thing to do.
No, look, that brings us to the end of the interview. Thank you so much. I've learned an absolute ton from you guys. Really fascinating stuff. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in.
Thanks, Nathan.
Yeah. Thanks, mate.
Cheers.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Talking Health Tech. Make sure you like and subscribe and share this episode with someone who might find it valuable. For more information and resources about healthcare innovation, visit talkinghealthtech.com.